In Fallout 4, we roamed the Boston Commonwealth, a world once familiar to us, now changed forever by nuclear war, in search of our sun, stolen by the notorious Institute. In Fallout 3, we explored what remains of the DC capital Wasteland in search of our father, and became the hero the Wasteland did not know that it needed. And in Fallout New Vegas, we braved the scorching heat of the Mojave Wasteland in search of Vegas, baby! Woohoo! And what happens in New Vegas stays in New Vegas. But where will Fallout 5 take us on our next adventure through the post-apocalyptic wasteland? Well, keep watching, because we're going to talk about it right now. It's time for my 2-bit 2 cents. Roll the intro!
La 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 la. What kind of intro is that?
Hey there, I'm Mackie, and today we're going to be taking a break from our PC building series to talk about something a little bit different. 5 cities that would be great locations for Fallout 5. But Mackie, your PC building series was so popular. Shut up, Tom Hanks! No one even asked you. Shut up! Yeah, so anyway, stick around to the end of the video. I think you might be surprised by what number 1 is. These aren't in any particular order, though, so let's get into it. To start out with, we have number 5, New Orleans, the Big Easy, which would be a fantastic name for a wasteland in Fallout 5, or for a great metro downtown area to explore. Now, New Orleans is a fan favorite choice to go to for the next location in Fallout. There are simply a ton of fan-made logos proving that this is a location that tons of fans would love to go to, and I can't say I blame them. There are a ton of good reasons to want to come here for Fallout 5. For one, New Orleans has a rich, eclectic culture, which includes Creole culture, which, according to the National Park Service, transcends racial boundaries. It connects people to their colonial roots, be they descendants of European settlers, enslaved Africans, or those of mixed heritage, which may include French, Spanish, and American Indian influences, and probably others too. Combine this with voodoo, black magic, and most terrifying of all, Catholics, and this combines for a unique atmosphere that is not only unique to New Orleans, but is perfect for a Fallout game. Just look at the buildings, look at the architecture. You don't see buildings like this anywhere else except New Orleans, and you can just imagine what it might be like to see these streets flooded with water. No, I'm not talking about Katrina. With the buildings all bombed out, what that might feel like to explore, wading through the water with moss and vines and mold growing all over these buildings. It would really provide a truly unique atmosphere that would be unlike anything we've explored in a Fallout game, or really any game before. Now, I suspect one of the reasons New Orleans was such a popular fan choice is because of the Mardi Gras festival. Mardi Gras could make the perfect set piece for Fallout. It's bright, it's colorful, there are a ton of people, there's debauchery and drinking and nudity. I don't know if Bethesda's game engine could handle it, but it could be awesome if they do it right. Most of what happens for Mardi Gras happens on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter, which is where a lot of the really cool stuff people think of when they think of New Orleans is. I always kind of felt like this part of town could function a little bit like the Strip in Fallout New Vegas, where you have high rollers in one area and then maybe you have a freeside type area outside that, you know, there's a barrier to and people can't get in. I think that could be pretty cool. Hey, here's something I bet you didn't know. Did you know New Orleans is widely considered to be the birthplace of modern poker? Well, it's true, and it might be a perfect opportunity for Bethesda to finally get in a functioning gambling system. Not some made-up game like Caravan, but like a real, legitimate poker system that could be in the game. It's kind of long overdue. It's hard for me to believe all these people are in the wasteland and they're not trying to gamble. They're willing to gamble with their lives. Why not their caps? Maybe even a riverboat casino location could be an option. You know, the Mississippi River's right there in New Orleans, empties out into the Gulf down there, and it could be a great opportunity for a really nice set piece place like a riverboat casino, maybe in a settlement, or maybe just stand alone somewhere out in a dingy old swamp. Hey, speaking of dingy and old, I was talking to your mom the other day. I'm sorry. I mean, what I was going to say was one of the things that makes New Orleans a distinctive choice is the topography, the flora and the fauna, the swamps and the wet and the forest and the trees and everything that comes with that kind of dank environment. Alligators and mosquitoes and turtles and snakes, and hopefully all of them mutated and looking absolutely horrifying and hideous. I can't think of anything better, like a greater gaming moment, than to be wading through some swamp, looking around in sneak mode, thinking I'm the one who's hidden when really I'm the one that's being stalked by some crazy friggin' crocodile mutation just hiding in the water waiting to just jump out and kill me. Ooh, and see if you can come along with this idea, this train of thought I'm having right now. Imagine traveling through a dank, foggy swamp, and then you come across a giant, mutated turtle that's like great big, like from the Never-Ending Story big. And it existed before the Great War happened, and it can tell you all this stuff, and it's super wise. That would be a super cool kind of thing that definitely is a possibility here in the swamps of New Orleans. Now, I could go on and on about New Orleans. There's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of cool scenery that we could go over with that could create amazing gameplay opportunities. But before we move on, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that New Orleans has an insane music scene with amazing artists from there, including Louis Armstrong, Fats Domino, The Meters, Jelly Roll Morton, and Louis Prima, which would all be amazing additions to any Fallout soundtrack. Moving on. Now, next up we have at number 4, Minneapolis and St. Paul, the Twin Cities. And they are called the Twin Cities because they are right next to each other, butted up next to each other, but they're far from twins. In fact, each city is kind of unique and different from each other. Minneapolis is more modern, with more modern architecture going up, whereas St. Paul kind of reserves the old-fashioned style and appeal. They both have two really distinct vibes, and you've never really seen that in a video game before, where you have two downtown areas that are distinct and different, two different cities, but they're right next to each other, and I think it creates some really interesting gameplay opportunities. Now, there isn't much information available about Minnesota out there. I've checked wikis and other places, but what I did find is that the Midwest in general, according to John Cassidy, a character from Fallout 2, is just a giant dust bowl that stretches on for miles, covered in radiation, and swarmed by gigantic tornadoes that are over a mile wide. Now, Minnesota is probably most famous for their long, unforgiving winters.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not just brutal winters they're famous for. It's also burning hot summers and beautiful spring and fall seasons as well. And I think it really opens the door for Bethesda to have a dynamic season cycle, a dynamic weather system, something that changes as you're playing the game throughout the year, as time passes. The environment and the weather and the seasons, they actually change, and the environment changes accordingly, and how you play changes. So you have to do different things. If it's cold, you need to bundle up. If it's hot, you need to dress down. And maybe there's pros and cons to doing those things. Like maybe you're more armored up when it's cold because you're wearing more layers, and maybe you're more vulnerable when it's hot because you're not wearing as many. There's a lot of gameplay things that could come into play with something like this, and then you couple that with gargantuan, monstrous, radioactive tornadoes roaming around that could pop up any moment, and you could have maybe the most interesting weather and season system ever put in a game ever. But it's not just Minnesota ice they're known for. They're also known for Minnesota nice. Sorry. But it's true. They even call it Minnesota nice. It might not be 100% sincere, but it's there. And it could make for an interesting dynamic. Maybe not for the whole wasteland, but what if there was like a small group of people who were overly nice, like on some We Happy Few type stuff where they want everyone to be happy and nice all the time, right? With like a seedy, disturbing reason behind it. That could make for a really absorbing, kind of dark, brooding storyline if they do it right. There are quite a few interesting locations to explore in Minnesota, including the Mall of America, which is like the Taj Mahal of decadent consumerism, which would be perfect for a city or a settlement or just a big location with tons of pre-war crap going on inside that you can explore and uncover mysteries, or maybe all of those things. It's friggin' huge. The Tough Luck Minnesota Vikings are from, well, Minnesota, and their stadium is supposed to look like a giant Viking warship. I think that's at least debatable. But in any case, I think it would be a funny location to have a group of post-apocalyptic Mad Max sort of looking Nord characters that have set up their city in that place. It'd be a really interesting kind of quirky faction to have. I think it's right up Bethesda's alley. They could pull in like some weird stuff from Skyrim, and it could just be a good laugh. Minnesota also has roots in bootlegging. There could be a faction set up in St. Paul that's trying to bootleg Skooma Jet or something like that, and there's another faction or group in the other city, maybe Minneapolis, that is trying to stop drugs from spreading. Maybe they're having a civil war. It could be a very interesting way to use the dual cities and the history of those cities to inform the story. Now, as far as music scenes go, Minneapolis and Minnesota in general has a pretty diverse and eclectic one. But how much of that diversity actually fits in the Fallout universe is up for hot debate. Now, before I go forward, I do want to say that in either Fallout 1 or 2, there is a Tool poster, like the metal band Tool from the 90s and 2000s or whenever. I never listened to a lot of Tool. Irrelevant. The point is that more modern artists are technically mentioned in the Fallout canon before Bethesda got their hands on it. So whether these artists would or wouldn't fit in there is kind of up to you, I guess. But some notable artists are Bob Dylan, Leo Kodke, Atmosphere, the Jayhawks, Trampled by Turtles, and, of course, Prince. Speaking of Prince, depending on how flexible you're willing to be with the music in Fallout, I think it would be interesting if there was a rival gang called the Princes, which kind of looks like Princess now that I'm reading it on the page, but what if they were a rival gang to the Kings? They love Prince, they love Elvis. It could be very funny and quirky, something that was just kind of missing from Fallout 4. Hey, if you're enjoying the videos so far, why don't you go ahead and leave a like? And what do you think? Do you think Minnesota would make a fun wasteland? Would you like to see a dynamic weather system in Fallout 5? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. At number 3 on this list, we have basically all of the state of Tennessee. I picked the state of Tennessee because I wanted to focus on 2 cities again, Memphis, Bluff City, and Nashville, Music City, as they are respectively known. I think that they would make a cool juxtaposition of dual cities again. I know, dual cities again, but I think that that would be very cool, the run down and out Bluff City versus the bright lights big city of Music City. A story dynamic that I think could be entertaining would be if you were in the down and out Bluff City and you were trying to make it to the big, bright, glitzy Nashville, which is actually where a lot of country music stars call home. It is like the Hollywood of the country music scene. Now, the most famous resident of Tennessee would have to be the alleged king of rock and roll himself, Elvis Presley, whose home, Graceland, is found in Memphis, Tennessee. And I think Graceland would make a perfect location for the base of the East Coast chapter of the Kings. I always loved the Kings, as I said before. I think they're a really funny group, and this would be a perfect opportunity to come back to them. Now, again, there's not a lot of real legitimate canon lore information out there about Tennessee. I did find out that there is apparently a musician character in Fallout 76. I didn't play 76 because why would I play something everyone said was bad? But this musician character says they are from Tennessee, and that Tennessee is really a lot like West Virginia in Fallout 76. It wasn't as devastatingly hit by nuclear weapons as other places. So if you want to know what the scenery would look like, I imagine it would be a lot more like what you see in Fallout 76, except with like NPCs from the beginning and actually fun gameplay that you don't have to keep paying for while you're playing it, you know. Now, there are a lot of great locations and little towns and natural locations that would make great exploration opportunities for Fallout 5, but the one that caught my eye the most was actually not in Tennessee. It was just outside of Tennessee in what is technically Kentucky, but Fallout has always had kind of overlap in the maps. There was always kind of parts of different states in the maps, but this place is called Mammoth Cave National Park. It is the world's longest cave system, which is over 400 miles long, and that would just be way too cool an opportunity to pass up for exploration. You could have a city down there, you could have all kinds of pre-war stuff, you could have a settlement be there. I mean, let your imagination run wild. You're talking about 400 miles of caves. They might not have an underground train system to explore, but this 400 miles of cave systems just might make up for that. I think the likelihood of them coming here is kind of low because they already came to West Virginia, and I think even with that map overlap thing I was talking about before, I think part of Tennessee was even in Fallout 76. Not 100% sure on that. I think I heard that somewhere, but like I said before, I didn't play 76. But moving on. Next up, we have Seattle, Washington at number 2, the Emerald City, also called Rain City, also called, for some reason, Jet City, but yeah, Seattle. So, in terms of Fallout canon lore on Seattle or Washington, there's not a lot of actual information, except a more interesting little tidbit comes from Fallout Tactics. Now, Fallout Tactics is not considered canon by Bethesda, but Bethesda could still draw inspiration from what happened in Fallout Tactics if they did choose to come to Washington. In Fallout Tactics, Seattle and Washington on a whole has become very tropical after radiation mutated a lot of the plant life there, and the settlers are creating, quote, medieval buildings in cities, unquote. I don't know what that means exactly, if they're building like castles and things with really tall walls, or if they're building smaller like hutches with thatched roofs. Like, I really don't quite know what to imagine from. But remember, you gotta take that with a giant friggin' salt tablet, because Fallout Tactics is not canon. Seattle is very corporate friendly, and there are a lot of corporations that call Seattle and Washington home, including Starbucks and Amazon, and that just makes Seattle a huge opportunity to have a lot of different creepy, evil corporations bases here that could answer a lot of lore questions and flesh out the lore and create a lot of new things. I'd love to see version of Amazon would look like. I'd love to see the Fallout universe of Starbucks, what that would look like. You know, is Slocum Joe's Starbucks? Or is Starbucks like some other, you know, canon-friendly, lore-friendly version that is like trying to put the more, you know, mom-and-pop Slocum Joe's out of business? You know, what's the big evil coffee shop corporation up to in the Fallout universe, and who is it, and what's that like? I think that could be really funny and, you know, creates a lot of opportunity to be reflective on coffee companies. There is a floating city that could be there. There's a whole freaking neighborhood of houseboats, and I don't mean like little tiny like houseboats, boats that people live in. I'm talking about houses that friggin' float on the water, like full-blown built houses floating on the water, an entire neighborhood that is like that. Now, I know a place like that probably would get destroyed in real life during a nuclear war, but we've let that go before, and this would just be too cool an opportunity to have a floating city in Fallout. There's a Space Needle that's there. Everyone gets excited about that. You can go there, you can go in it, you can look at it. The Space Needle. Yay! But the real pizza resistance is not the Space Needle, but actually the friggin' volcano behind it. Mount friggin' Rainier is an active volcano. It's beautiful, it looks great, it's in the background of everything, it's super scenic, it's a whole thing you could explore, and it's just a friggin' smoke and lava set piece moment just waiting to freaking happen, and it should be connected to the story somehow. I mean, that's really where the most interesting opportunities exist for Seattle. I think it's worth mentioning that the chosen one from Fallout 2 comes from Arroyo, which is in Oregon, just to the south of Washington. I think it would be fascinating for Bethesda to blur those state lines a little bit again and get back to Fallout's roots by being able to go back there and see what Arroyo is up to. I think a lot of Fallout fans would find that absolutely awesome. And coming in at number 1, again in no particular order, Anchorage, Alaska. Alaska, known as the last frontier. Anchorage, known as the city of lights and flowers, apparently, but we're gonna just go with the City of Lights because that's just a lot cooler. Now, of all the locations on this list, there is probably the most lore available about Alaska. We know more about Alaska than any other place mentioned on this list, yet there is still so much we don't know. Anchorage, Alaska is one of the most important places in Fallout lore. Now, the basics that we do know about Alaska go like this. Alaska was the battleground for the Sino-American resource war between China and the US, which was spurred on by dwindling resources. China wanted the oil that we had in Alaska, so they landed troops in Alaska in 2066. The US wanted to be able to move their troops through Canada, but Canada was nervous about that, so the US annexed Canada and invaded mainland China. They fought for 11 years until January 2077 when the US reclaimed Anchorage. 9 months later, the Great War occurred. The lore and history makes Alaska a place of high interest for fans. Was Alaska hit with nukes when the Great War finally started? What was the effect of the radioactive fallout, either directly or indirectly? Was there fallout from other places, even if they weren't hit? Did that still affect them? Or were they hit and were they devastated by that? Like, what effect did that have on their climate? Did it create a nuclear winter? Or did it cause a weird climate change? Maybe there isn't any snow in Alaska anymore, or maybe it's not like it was. Maybe Alaska wasn't really hit with any nukes, but climate change from the Great War caused the polar north caps to change, making Alaska maybe like a paradise that was untouched by nuclear fallout and is green and lush and full of survivors. You know, maybe somewhere bunkered down in there, there's the Enclave hiding out from pre-war times, just somewhere in a bunker there in Alaska. Maybe they haven't even come out since the Great War happened. Or even crazier, maybe there's some Chinese version of the Enclave that we could find. That would be super intense. Uncovering what was left behind from the Americans, from the Chinese armies, whatever's there, whatever's happening in Alaska would answer a lot of questions about the world of Fallout, both before and after the war, and would really tell us a lot about the world. Again, within the Fallout universe. Well, that's my 2-bit 2 cents. Did number 1 surprise you? Do you like my picks, or do you like a different city or state better? Let me know where you think Fallout 5 should be in the comments down below. If you liked the video, go ahead and smash that like button and click subscribe so you can get more 2-bit opinions and perspectives from me every week. And make sure you ring that bell icon so you'll always know when you can get my 2 cents. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I appreciate you. Peace.